Hi, everyone. I'm Ken Folven, Senior Director of Quality Assurance with Clear Capital. We've received some great feedback on this webinar series, An Appraiser's Guide to Quality Appraisals. And today's webinar is our third in a four-part series and is focused on how to avoid revision requests on conventional loans. So be sure to sign up for our last part. The registration link is going to be put in the chat for you there. And in this webinar, we're going to cover the top revision requests we see from lenders, provide guidance on those, and share best practices that we picked up on. Then we're going to wrap it up, highlighting some emerging trends that we've identified. And presenting with me today is Heather Kahn, Senior Business Analyst with the Quality Assurance team at Clear Capital. So first, I'll kick us off with some benefits of this webinar series that we wanted to touch on briefly. And the first is staying connected. So if you're not working in an office full of appraisers, it can be challenging to stay connected to all the industry and customer changes, particularly over the past few years. And we also know that your time is valuable. We want to help you receive the fewest revision requests as possible. And then there's the consequences of delays. So the post-delivery requests not only impact your time as the appraiser, but they also have downstream impacts on the AMC, the lender, and most importantly, the borrower. And then certainly last but not least is improving the credibility of your report and trust in our profession. As appraisers, we have responsibility to promote the public trust. And as our industry continues to change, we need to show the value and reliability in the appraisal process. All right, as I mentioned, we're currently on the third webinar in our four-part series. Our final webinar on FHA revisions and reconsideration of value requests will be held 2 weeks from today on July 26th, and we hope to see you there. So if you're interested in that, scroll up in the chat to get the registration link. All right, well, let's get into it then. So here's a list of our most common revision categories we see across all the different lenders we work with at Clear Capital. And I'm going to turn it over to Heather to kick us off with some helpful tips and insights into how to avoid these revisions.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be with you today. So let's dive into the revision requests we see most often, comp selection, and specifically proximity. As we all know, the first three rules of real estate are location, location, location. I think through the process of developing our report, we as appraisers sometimes lose sight of this. When you're deep in the comp grid, trying to bracket all the salient features, the importance of location can get forgotten. Keeping location top of mind will minimize revisions related to comp selection. So let's get into some of the specifics. These are the things we see most often as revisions in this space. So sales are distant, excessive miles, different school district, across boundary. These are the things that we want to avoid as much as possible. We know that location is often the first thing a buyer decides when looking for a home. And when we use distant sales, we might be looking at a different buyer pool. Time adjustments are easy to calculate and easy to support. The rule of thumb is to first go back in time, then go out in distance when searching for a sale. Comparables do not bracket location or view. Thinking about the specific location or view of the subject and how that compares to each comp really helps to avoid revisions in this area. For example, if you had a property that was located on the wide part of a lake with a full 180-degree view, that might not compare to a comp that's located deep down a cove with a much more limited view. So when we're looking for comps and we see that there's one on a lake, that's great, but be sure to dive in a little deeper and do that extra analysis. More proximate comps are available. We see so many revisions for recent sales on the subject street or right next door to the subject. Even if these sales show different characteristics, maybe they have a larger GLA, what have you, if they represent the same buyer pool, it's a good idea to include them. If ultimately they're really not a good indicator of value, provide that commentary in the addendum and use the specific address. That's a really quick way to avoid a common revision. Proximate sales are outliers in price or value. If more proximate sales are showing a reconciled price different from the distant sales, that can signal to the reader that the other comps might be from a different market. If that happens in your evaluation, take another look at your market analysis, see if you can add more proximate sales, or as a last resort, maybe make some location adjustments. And most weight not given to the most proximate sales. Lenders often expect most weight to be given to the most proximate sale. So if that isn't the case, be sure that an adequate explanation is provided. So moving on to the next common reason for comp selection revisions, date of sale. So I know I just said that going back in time is more desirable than going out in distance, which still holds true, but it's not. It's important to not forget about the date of sale altogether. If sales are dated, explain why it was necessary to go back in time. Maybe include a more recent sale or a listings to help support the subject's current market. Be sure that more recent sales aren't available. Sometimes we get so caught up in bracketing a certain feature that we miss more relevant, more recent sales. If you find that more recent sales are just not as good an indicator as those that you already have in your report, be sure to provide the addresses of those sales in the addendum and indicate why they weren't used. Again, this is an easy way to avoid revisions and specifically reconsideration of value requests. Time adjustments are missing in an increasing or decreasing market. This is more common than you'd think. If you're using a sale with a contract date more than 3 months old in a changing market, time adjustments should be applied. If time adjustments are not warranted, be sure to provide an adequate explanation with lots of supporting documentation. Dated sales are outliers in the adjusted value range. Sometimes we see an appraiser indicating a stable market, but you look at the grid, the dated sales show a significantly different value from the more recent sales. This is usually an indication that time adjustments are warranted and further market analysis is necessary. So let's talk a little bit about adjustments and adjustment commentary. So first, comment on all adjustments, even the small ones. ADUs, outbuildings, solar panels, we receive a lot of revisions because those things aren't commented on. So be sure if there's an adjustment made in the grid, there's a corresponding comment made. Condition and quality specifically is where we see a lot of adjustment related revisions. That's because those features in particular can have a significant impact on value. So get specific when you're talking about those adjustments. Discuss the specific updating and the specific materials. Lenders have access to MLS photos and they will challenge those ratings in the report if they don't seem to align with what they're seeing in the photos. Comment when adjustments are not made. If there's a significant difference in the grid, you find that there's no market reaction, be sure to provide that commentary. Discuss contribution of amenities and support for adjustments. So that's providing the why and the how. The grid tells us the what, we don't need that restated. And then the best adjustment support is, of course, a bracketing comparable. Just be sure that the adjusted value of that bracketing comparable aligns with the other sales. So diving more specifically into adjustment commentary, we want to look at some examples of what to do and what not to do. So what not to do, just restating what we can see in the grid. For example, comp 1 was adjusted for condition, parking, pool. We see that. That's not telling us anything new. Something that we'd like to see. Quality of construction adjustments are based on an analysis of market reaction based on similar sales within the marketplace. That's explaining how the adjustment was calculated. And then for the what. Comp 3, this home features marble kitchen counters, crown molding, wainscoting. That gets into specifics and explains the why. So Ken's going to get into deferred maintenance revisions and the common reasons for those.
All right, great info, Heather. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of explaining the why behind the adjustments are made. So I like the point that you made on that. That's a good one. So beyond that, let's talk a little bit about deferred maintenance. So with respect to conventional loans, it's important to remember that most lenders prefer as-is values. So when it comes to deferred maintenance, most lenders would prefer that you provide a cost to cure rather than making the report subject to the repairs being complete. So remembering this for conventional loans is important, and certainly will save you some revision requests on the topic. But when you do identify deferred maintenance, there are 4 really important aspects to cover in your report. And the first is provide a photo. So don't just talk about it. Don't just comment about it. Make sure that you have a photograph as well, demonstrating that deferred maintenance. The next is commenting on it. Be sure that you also don't just provide a photo, but be sure that you comment on it as well. So talk about what it is, whether that's worn or soiled flooring, missing railings, peeling paint, broken windows, etc. Whatever that is, make sure that you describe what that deferred maintenance is, followed by a cost to cure. Provide a cost and an estimated cost to cure. Like, what is it going to take to remediate that issue? Be sure that you disclose that clearly in your report. And then last but not least, the value impact. Consider the impact on value and marketability in your value conclusion. And this could be in the form of your condition rating given to the subject property and adjustment amount to the comps. So be sure that that's considered in your overall value impact. Another tip for you as it relates to deferred maintenance is, if you're appraising the subject property and you feel like it warrants a low condition rating, something the equivalent to a UAD C5 or C6 condition rating, be sure you check the letter of engagement out, because that could be an instance where the lender may require the report be made subject to repairs needed to bring that property to a minimum of a C4 condition. So that would be kind of the one exception to what I said about providing a cost to cure, would be as if you feel as though the subject property is in that C5, C6 condition rating scale. Check out your letter of engagement on that. Again, it's real likely that you're going to be required or requested to make that report subject to repairs to bring that property to a minimum of C4 condition. So if you can follow these steps and be sure to read the letter of engagement for any unique requirements around deferred maintenance, it's sure to save you some time on the back end with different types of revision requests. All right, let's move on to external influences. This is another really common revision request we see, and we see this these types of revisions because underwriters use aerial photos and review the subject property and surroundings. It's really easy for an underwriter or a quality assurance reviewer to identify these concerns themselves. So wanted to cover some of that as it relates to external influences, wanted to cover the most common external influences we see that are not identified or disclosed in appraisal reports. And those consist of a busy road, whether or not the subject property is in close proximity to an active railroad, that there's commercial properties nearby, or the subject property is in close proximity to a house of worship or schools. Those are some of the common external influences we see revisions coming back to appraisers for. So be sure to keep those in mind. And when you identify an external influence, there are a few steps you should take, whether that external influence is positive or negative, but there's a few steps that you should take. So be sure you need to discuss what it is, provide commentary around what that influence is. Then, when all possible, provide a sale with a similar influence. That's going to be really important to demonstrate marketability, as providing a sale with some type of a similar external influence. And don't hesitate to go back further in time if you need to. I know a lot of appraisers feel like the myth is you can't go beyond 12 months. And it's really important to demonstrate marketability and provide support in your appraisal report for these types of influences to go back further in time. So if you need to go back beyond 3 years, go ahead and do that, and then look at applying any time adjustments that are needed, but don't hesitate to go back further in time to find a comparable that has a similar influence. And then last but not least is disclose how the influence on the subject property compares to the comparables that you've used, and ask yourself the question, does this influence present any marketability concerns, and how have you supported that in your report? Lenders definitely want to know about any marketability concerns, so be sure that you cover that in your report. So that's a few tips on external influences, and I'm going to turn it back over to Heather now to discuss some of the most common photo-related revision requests we see.
Thanks, Ken. So photo revisions, nobody likes the photo revisions. And I think that's because they're so simple, but because they're so simple, they're easy to miss. So let's talk about what we see most often. Bathrooms. Missing bathroom photos are the #1 photo revision. Every bathroom needs to be provided. So if it's in an accessory unit or a basement, be sure that every bathroom photo is represented in the report. Be sure to also label clearly. So sometimes there are multiple photos of the same bathroom. Be sure that's clearly indicated so that the reader doesn't get confused. And half baths need to be specifically noted as a half bath in the label. A kitchen and room representation of living areas and bedrooms is required. Most often I see that the living room photo is missing. Many lenders require interior photos of the outbuildings. So I once had a heartbreaking conversation with an appraiser who had to drive something like 60 miles back out to the property to take an interior photo of the shed. And we talked to the lender, they couldn't get around it, their investor required it. I think that's true of a lot of lenders. So be sure to just photograph everything when you're inspecting the property. Don't forget the interior photos of those outbuildings. And then comparables. Incorrect or missing comparables photos are the most recent, most common revisions we see behind those bathroom photos. So be sure that nothing's missing. And as you rearrange comps, as you remove some, add some, be sure that those photos align to the comps that you've provided in your report. One last review before you submit is always a good idea. So getting into hybrid photo requirements, just as a reminder, hybrids are, we're talking about the desktop appraisal and the 1004 hybrid specifically. Those photo requirements are the same as traditional work. So when you receive a hybrid order, be sure to look through the photos that you're provided to ensure everything is there. If anything is missing, go back right away. That'll avoid any delays in the process. And then be sure to include all of those photos in your report. So here at Clear Capital, we have a separate photo and sketch addendum. It's really easy to download and then upload that to your report. Even though we as the ANSI and lots of ANSIs are providing you that information, we need that to exist within your data file so that it's all in one place. We have to have those photos uploaded. Don't forget, compra photos are still required. This is one of the most common revisions on the hybrids. Moving on to some best practices. Check. So we want to make sure that we're reading the letter of engagement. Know that those LOEs can be really lengthy, but often the most important information is at the top of the LOE. You can also do a control find for some of the unique features of the subject, such as an ADU, private road. That'll take you right to those requirements and ensure you're not missing any required commentary. Photos. So be sure that you have all the necessary photos before you finish your inspection or when you first receive your hybrid assignment, and label those photos clearly so you're sure you're not missing anything and that the reader isn't confused. In writing your assignment, be sure that your commentary is well organized. Otherwise, it's just really difficult for the reader to find what they're looking for, and that can prompt additional revisions. The more boilerplate commentary you provide, the higher the chance of conflicting comments. So avoid it as much as possible or eliminate the boilerplate altogether. And then when it comes to comp reconciliation and then report reconciliation, one, always explain your comparable selection process. Two, explain the why and the how in your adjustment commentary. And then lastly, in your reconciliation of your report, be sure that it's clear to the reader how you arrived at your final value conclusion, indicating which comp received the most weight and why. And then before you submit your report, read it over with fresh eyes. Like we saw in the last webinar, that's just a good practice for a lot of appraisers. When you kind of take a step back and read the report as a reader would, you'll catch the inconsistencies and anything that appears to be missing. And then run the checks that your software provider provides for you. That only takes a minute, and it really helps avoid those revisions, in addition to any of those checks that you see when you're uploading your report to the AMC or to the lender. Now that we've covered some best practices, we're going to get into some emerging revision trends.
All right. Thanks, Heather. That's a lot of really great information. And I especially like your tip there that you pointed out on the reconciliation. I think just overall, a well-written and descriptive reconciliation by the appraiser explaining which comps were weighted the most and why is a key in helping the reader understand the approach, the value conclusion, and I think it also helps minimize requests downstream to address alternative sales. So that's a big one to point out there. So, all right, well, yeah, as Heather mentioned, let's wrap it up discussing some newer emerging trends we're seeing that everyone should be aware of. And that's really related to things on ANSI standards. So I'm sure most of you are aware that Fannie Mae adopted ANSI standards for measuring, calculating, and reporting gross living areas for the subject property on appraisal reports with effective dates on April 1st or after. And we're starting to see lenders send revision requests to appraisers for ANSI compliance related topics. And we've outlined here a couple of the most common revisions we're seeing around ANSI standards and related compliance. So follow along here, we've got a few of them. The first is including a declaration. So to remove any doubt your measurements comply with ANSI standards, be sure to provide a declaration disclosing that. And when you're providing a declaration or a statement in your report, ensure it applies to the correct form type. We're seeing statements, ANSI statements applied to incorrect form types. And I think it goes back to that boilerplate commentary that Heather talked about, that it's carrying over from different form types. So examples of incorrect form types would be like a 2 to 4 unit dwelling or apartment style condos. You don't have to comply with ANSI standards for those. So make sure that when you are providing a declaration, it's there and it's applicable to the correct form type. The next is ensure that your building sketch or floor plan represents measurements that are taken to the nearest 1 inch or 1/10 of a foot. Remember, if all of your measurements on your sketch are rounded to the nearest 1/2 foot or foot, it's going to raise question on compliance with ANSI standards. So be sure to check your sketch settings that's not automatically rounding anything for you. And really be sure that the output of your sketch or floor plan demonstrates that your measurements are taken to the nearest 1 inch or 1/10 of a foot. That's a pretty common one we're starting to see, is lenders are actually looking at the sketch, reviewing the dimensions, the exterior dimensions, and if they're not taken to the nearest inch, they're sending a revision request back to the appraiser questioning whether or not ANSI standards were followed. And a little plug here for Kubicasa. If you've not tried that out yet, it's a great opportunity to do that, and it will automatically take care of that problem for you. So I'd encourage you to give it a try if you haven't tried Kubicasa out. The third one here is on separating below grade areas. So ensure you're not including any below grade areas in your above grade square footage. And just remember that photos are being reviewed by underwriters and reviewers alike. So they're going to be looking to see if it looks like there's any below grade square footage included based on the photos and based on the sketch. So make sure of that. And then lastly, make sure your measurements comply with all different ceiling height requirements. And there's a few of them as it relates to ANSI, but as one example, to be included in finished square footage calculations. Finished areas must have a ceiling height or minimum ceiling height of 7 feet or greater. So again, photos are being reviewed. Any slope ceilings is going to be compared to what's listed in your sketch. And if it doesn't look like you've complied with those requirements, you could see a revision on it. So be sure that you're taking all of that into account. All right, that kind of wraps up our revisions on ANSI standards, but there's certainly some that we're starting to see more of, and we wanted to share that information with you guys. So to conclude our presentation today, here's some information. If you're not currently on our panel and are interested in joining, please use the information here to learn more. And we've also provided a few relevant industry links that you should be sure to familiarize yourself with. So we have some information here on joining our panel. You can find out more about Cuba Casa if you're interested in that. We've got some links here on the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac selling guides, FHA, and then we also provided some helpful ANSI related FAQs for you as well. All right, and we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and hope you found this webinar helpful in understanding some of the common revisions and the guidance that we're providing on how to avoid those. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Don't forget to sign up for our next webinar, Avoiding ROVs and FHA Revisions.